All right. Welcoming people in. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. Happy day after the election. I hope folks are feeling all right. I know that I personally have some political exhaustion in the current reality of the world, but we're making it through. And let's see how our democracy does through this. I hope you had a chance to spend some time thinking and having meaningful conversations last night with family and friends. And I know I followed the news probably more than is good for my stress levels. Brian, I know you made some smart decisions to check out last night when you knew it wasn't going to be called. You're a wise man. In the chat, as you're joining us today, it's always fun to see where folks are coming from. So do me a favor and drop your name, where you're joining us from today, and go ahead and share with us your weather report. So your feelings based on a weather report. So you could be like, I'm feeling cloudy with a strong chance of rain, or I'm feeling sunny or partly cloudy. I don't know. Melissa says from Santa Fe, she's feeling sunny and 75, or maybe it's sunny and 75 there. We're not sure. Jennifer's feeling cloudy with a drizzle. Becky's coming at us from Arizona. Jean is here from Wisconsin. Hello. Your state, obviously a huge deal in this election. Both my roommates, Esteban and Jackie, have been working in Wisconsin since it's such a electoral stronghold. So I hope you're feeling all right today. Jean, I'm sure it's busy there. Karen's here from Madera, California, feeling a little hazy. I feel you on that. It has been hazy here in California. Bobby, welcome. Folks coming in from all over. We got Moore Park in the building. Awesome. Hi, Diane from Moore Park here. Looking forward to a sunset. Indeed, it should be beautiful here. You're not so far away from me. So grateful to have you all here in the room. Talking about support, something we can lean on presently in ways that are probably beyond necessary at this point in the day. I'm going to step back to bring Dr. Brian Smith forward, Director of Research here at Character Strong, and an expert at giving you some practical frameworks and some more practical tools in this adult social emotional learning webinar series that we've been up to. To pre-answer a couple of your questions, yes, this will be recorded. Yes, you'll get a copy of the slides. Yes, we will send that all to you in an email. And if you have any chat or questions along the way, feel free to drop it in the chat. You can drop it publicly or privately directly to me. And at the end, hopefully get a chance to share or check in with Brian on some of those questions. So Brian, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself and let's get rolling.
Okay, hi. It's quite a day to be doing an SEL presentation that is connected to stress, because I think a lot of us from a lot of different directions are probably experiencing a lot of stress right now. Okay, our topic today is the power of relationships and social support. Just briefly, you'll notice I have a few initials after my name. I worked directly with kids for 15 years, just about every place and every kind of facility and setting you can imagine, including elementary, middle, and high schools. I was an elementary counselor. I was a high school social worker. I did drug and alcohol counseling in a high school. Did a lot of mental health, did a lot of different things. As a social worker, went back to school to get my doctorate, really in part out of frustration with struggling to really make a difference with kids who had a range of really serious challenges. And I tried to focus on how do we get upstream? How do we try to support healthy development and prevent problems from coming up? How do we meet students and young people's needs and help them have better outcomes? And so I've spent quite a few years in the social emotional learning field. My role typically, as it is now largely at Character Strong, is to try to translate the science and research around child development and social emotional development, mental health and well-being into intervention content that is practical enough that it can be implemented in school settings, and really something that's hopefully going to make a difference. So today We are going to be talking about a variety of things. Yes, this is adult SEL, so there is some there is some social emotional competence related content that you're going to be learning. I think a bunch of the stuff in here also applies to the work that you do with your students and your colleagues. We're going to talk a little bit about stress and how people cope with stress, some of the science and research on stress, where social connection fits into the stress picture, and some of the interesting things I found out about social support, both in terms of what helps and what makes a difference, as well as actually ways in which social support can kind of backfire sometimes that might be a little surprising. We're going to dig into empathy and perspective taking because it's a really important part of connecting with other people. And along the way, I'm going to sprinkle in some kind of interactive stuff that we can hopefully break up the presentation with a little bit, as well as basically they're meant to be takeaways that you can use with students to try to build connection during this distance learning challenge that the vast majority of us are dealing with right now. So let's jump in. I want to start out by helping us kind of get focused and grounded and centered into really being able to concentrate on just the material that's in this presentation, how it applies to our lives and our work, sort of let a lot of the outside stuff go, of which there's a ton right now. This woman, Elizabeth Stanley, wrote a book called Widen the Window. It's an unbelievable book, but it's it's very heavy. It's packed. It's a thick read. However, she has now developed her stress coping and resilience course into an online course. And if you click, you'll be able to get these slides. If you click the hyperlink on Widen the Window, it'll take you to the website for the course. And the company that she's working with has said that they will give the course for free to educators. So if you're somebody that could use some support around stress coping, especially if you have any kind of history of chronic stress or trauma, I really recommend you check it out. So one of the things that she talks about is that we sort of have, colloquially speaking, two parts of our brain, the survival brain and the thinking brain. And the survival brain is where is the part of our brain that decides how safe we are and decides whether we're in danger and decides whether we need to ramp up our stress levels. So just to kind of cope with stress here for a second in a concrete way and help us communicate to our survival brains that we can't talk to directly, that in fact we're in a safe place right now and we can kind of stand down if we have any of our stress guards up. What I want you to do is called the contact points exercise. So take a moment just sitting where you are or standing where you are and focus your attention on the places where your body is contacting the physical world. I'm standing here right now, so that's primarily the bottoms of my feet. If you're sitting in a chair or on a couch, it's probably your lower back, your bottom, the backs of your legs. Take a moment and really just try to focus and direct your attention to the parts of your body that are in physical contact with your surroundings. And then see if you can find one particular place. Maybe it's one part of your leg, or maybe it's, some place that you can really notice the contact and focus on that point in your body for just a moment. Really focus in on the sensation of being supported by the floor, by the chair, by wherever your body is. You get distracted, just try to bring your focus back to that contact point and the physical sensation you get from that. Now, we have a lot to cover. This is a short version, but go ahead and just kind of look around a little bit, notice your physical surroundings, and then we are going to move ahead. So I don't need to tell you, but teaching is really stressful. The American Federation of Teachers did a massive survey. 70% of teachers said, yeah, they often thought their work was stressful. 80% felt physically, mentally exhausted at the end of the day. Gallup national poll. Did you get a lot of stress yesterday? teachers said yes at 46% rate, and it's the highest. I mean, teachers typically in all the surveys are ranked top or tied with nurses as the most stressful profession. And this, of course, was when school was in person. I've done a fair amount of online sessions now with teachers, including going into breakout groups, hearing people talk about what it's like to try and teach online or through this kind of distance learning model. And even if you don't have kids at home, young kids of your own at home, it's incredibly difficult and stressful. And if you do, I really feel for you. So, you know, we have a lot to kind of grapple with in education in terms of stress. But, you know, one of the good news pieces is that your social emotional competence actually helps prevent burnout. So adult SEL for educators is an important part of what we need to be focusing on to help people kind of maintain some of their self-efficacy in teaching and, again, avoid really getting too burnout. So taking care of ourselves is critically important if we want to be able to take care of our students, if we want to be able to take care of our families. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Now, we all have a ton of stress. Can't we just like, I don't want to think about it, put our heads in the sand? No, it doesn't actually work that way, because the reality is trying to avoid stress is one of the things oftentimes that makes stress worse. The studies say that if your approach to stress is to try to just escape from it, not think about it, it actually increases your depression, your conflicts with other people, negative outcomes. So take a sec and just think about this and write something in the chat. What kind of things do people do to sort of not have to experience stress and the difficult feelings and thoughts that come with that can actually in the long run backfire and make things worse? Just let's get a few examples in the chat. See if I can jump in there. What do I see? Drink, sleep, shop, blame other people. That's a good one. Yeah, and the funny thing about a lot of these, watch TV, eat, drink, sleep, they're all fine in moderation, right? So part of the problem is that, venting turns to gossip. We're going to talk more about that. Yeah, binge watch TV. I mean, frankly, I find watching a good show on TV to be super relaxing. But if I spend all evening doing that, there's a lot of things that I probably should be doing that I'm not, that are going to pile up on me. And needless to say, for a lot of people, like 1 or 2 drinks or glasses of wine are pretty relaxing. If you keep going with that, we know where that goes. So I think one of the things that's important to say about stress is that the reality is, what all the research says is that the number one thing that makes a difference in how well you're going to cope with stress is whether you take it on. And I think embracing stress, really facing it, it's a brave thing to do. And I'm not going to talk a lot about meaning right now, but stress is part of a meaningful life, and there's reasons why we're stressed, and usually they have something to do with something that we care about, something that's important to us. And it's good to find the connection there, because if we spend all our time just trying to avoid discomfort, it makes it hard to live our lives, especially when things are as stressful as they are now. So what we want to do is take action. And I like this James Baldwin quote: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So actively coping with stress is the number one thing you have to keep in mind, because that's been shown to be the most effective key to really tackling stress. And we're going to talk about one piece of that today, which is really around social connections and social support. Now, this is one of the things, in addition to the contact points exercise, that I'm kind of sprinkling in that you can do with your students. And this is something that oftentimes works well as an almost daily practice. It's really quick. And one of the things that I've noticed sitting in on Zoom classes with kids, with character strong lessons at least, is that it's easier to get kids to throw things in the chat than it is to get them to actually talk, much less turn on their videos. So I'd like you for a second here, just write something really quickly in the chat. What is something that you're grateful for today? A small thing, a big thing, something that matters to you. The sun and my son. Very nice. Children, family, friends, sunshine. The secretary, nice. over-the-counter sinus meds, mental sanity, the ability to run. Oh, doesn't it feel good? Beautiful weather, my dog. I know, I'm so thankful for my dog. Changing seasons. Yeah. I mean, there are, as this list kind of shows, like everything from everyday things to big things that we can feel grateful for. And it's a simple wellness strategy, because when we're taking a moment to really focus on and find things that we're grateful for, we're countering the negativity bias that everybody has to hone in on the negative. And we're kind of helping to get our brain to like actually focus on like what is good, because no matter what the situation is, there's still something that we can be grateful for. It's a good practice, and it's something that kids take to really well. Okay, so weird science. Let's talk about stress, and let's talk about science and research. Who traditionally gets studied in psychology research? Weird people, by which the weird acronym has come up from this idea of Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. That's where they do psychology research. That's who we know about. And the reality is, it's often young psychology undergrads, and traditionally, it was typically males that were studied. And so if we look at psychology and the history of psychology, a lot of the theories and a lot of the ideas that they came up with were really based on research on men. And frankly, the assumption was that, we can just study men because women are either like men, and so that works, or if they're not, then maybe there's something about them that's problematic. But really, like, men can be the norm. And hopefully, one of the things that's been talked about where you are is that with all of the things that's been going on all summer around race and equity, is that this idea of assuming that a certain kind of person is the norm, is the standard, is one of the problematic things in our society that's driven all kinds of discrimination, whether it's sexism in this case or racism, you name it. So it's true of stress research as well. What happened was there were some women who somehow made it into academia and were actually looking at the stress research and interested in it themselves, and they didn't recognize themselves in what they were seeing. And what they found when they looked is that about 90% of the research had in fact been done on men. So what did they find when they did all this stress research on men? Well, first of all, the mental model, the working model is really this guy here on the left. He's like the Robinson Crusoe. He's a man by himself in the wilderness, just standing alone and figuring out how to survive. And the primary response that they have focused on in the earlier times of stress research was the fight or flight response. That basically you as an individual person are in a situation where you have to either fight your way out of it, or maybe you use the stress energy to run away. And of course, what we know is that there's also the freeze component, which is kind of just like a shutdown if you're in an extreme stress situation. And the thing about this fight, flight, or freeze is that it's really about what an individual person is going to do to take care of themselves in a dangerous situation. And what we know from the research is that when you are having the fight or flight response to either a short-term or chronic stressful situation, it really promotes like some qualities that are problematic: extremism, very hyper tribal and very kind of self-focused thinking and behaviors. And a lot of times people will actually, blame other people. It's something that came up in the chat around, what do people who are stressed do that makes things worse? Blame other people, lash out. And again, really, it's psychologically focusing you on your own individual survival. It's harder to think things through and analyze situations, weigh risks, and it actually decreases empathy. So what is this really ideally tuned for? I mean, it might make sense if you're suddenly, in danger of being attacked by a wild animal or by another person. Maybe you need to be able to fight or flight. But with today's stressors, typically that's not what they are. And typically, actually, these days, a lot of what's going on now, I would consider to be more like collective threats. And, if you take the example of all the stressors involved in the pandemic shutdown and distance learning, those are not stressors that are unique to any one of us. Those are collective challenges that ideally we could try to figure out how to pull together in order to deal with. So the reality is, from more modern research, is that in fact, human beings are by nature social. We are hardwired to connect to other people. This Robinson Crusoe man on his own idea, it's never really been how people have been. It's not how we evolved. It's not how we lived. And in fact, research shows that the quickest, most efficient way to calm down the nervous system when you're upset and rein in stress is in fact to connect with somebody else. Being able to connect with people is a key resilience factor. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And I think that the idea that I'm promoting here is that we're really needing to move beyond this kind of John Wayne culture of independence where everybody just takes care of themselves to kind of shift more towards a resilience through connectedness, kind of a collective resilience approach. The reality is, if you think about what people put in the gratitude chat there, the number of people that actually put in family, relatives, people, connection is natural. And it's something that I'm going to sort of dig into a little bit more. Loneliness, we know, is actually physically toxic. It reduces longevity. What do they say? It's worse for your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And loneliness, basically, the reason it's so difficult for us is that it signals that there's a basic human need that isn't getting met. And if you think about it evolutionarily, if you were a human by yourself, we don't have claws, we don't have fangs, we're kind of helpless little pink people. What are we going to do? If you're by yourself, you're in danger. And so in our brains, it kind of still feels like that. And if you're in danger, then you become more hypervigilant to threat. If you become constantly hypervigilant to threat, that's basically a form of toxic stress. And the reality is, a lot of us actually are especially struggling with this right now because of the pandemic. A lot of people are forced into situations where there's higher levels of loneliness than there was before. And I think that it's harder to stay connected. And so we want to talk about ways to do that and the importance of doing that. So when they looked at the research on stress more recently, in fact, these women, what they found was that there's a fourth response. It's not just fight, flight, or freeze. There's also what they named the tend and befriend response. And the idea here is that, in fact, people typically, historically, have always lived in groups and in families. And in times of danger, simply taking care of yourself by running away or fighting or something like that wasn't always what was needed. A lot of times what was needed was banding together and, maybe even putting yourself in dangerous positions to take care of kids and take care of people who are with you. It's a social response to threat. And what it does in many ways is that it releases a hormone called oxytocin that is naturally released in response to stress, but it's much stronger if you engage in behaviors linked to the tend and befriend response. Now, oxytocin's been called the love molecule or the cuddle hormone, but the reality also from research that we know is that, in fact, oxytocin makes us braver. It makes us braver and able to, even in difficult situations, reach out and support each other, reach out and connect. And when you have more oxytocin going on in your system, it lowers your heart rate, your blood pressure, your cortisol level, which is a stress hormone. So oxytocin by itself actually helps buffer up the stress that we're experiencing. And the more of it that we can release through connecting and reaching out to other people, the better. So again, the tend and befriend response, it encourages caregiving and gives you strength to really connect to people. And the way that we activate it is when we consciously choose to reach out and connect with other people and maybe help out other people as well. One of the things that the research on social support says is that, in fact, it's at least as good for you to reach out and help somebody else as it is for someone to provide social support to you. So when you do find the courage and strength to step outside your own discomfort and say, wait, I can still be there for somebody else. It's a way to kind of boost the tend befriend response, boost your oxytocin levels. Now, of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the message has been, the correct message, I would say poorly branded, which is social distancing. Social distancing is not what we should be doing. What we should be doing is physical distancing and really focusing on social connection. Now, here in Seattle, we just turned the corner and it's getting a lot harder to socialize outside. My personal read of the research is that being around people outside with a little distance is pretty safe. It's getting cold now. It's going to be harder to do that. That's one of the reasons I think we're seeing COVID blow up all over the country. However, there's a lot of ways to connect with people that aren't just in person. So let's talk a little bit more about social connection and stress, because what's interesting is that the science on this is not the same across everybody. So we know that getting and giving social support buffers stress for everybody. So what we know also about women and teen girls is that they have more relationships. They have more close friendships and close relationships, so they have more access to social support. And in fact, they're more likely to turn to other people when they're stressed out. What about boys and men? I wish I had somehow done a quick poll to find out how many, if any, men we have on this on this webinar, but I'm guessing, I know 80% of educators in the country are women, so I'm guessing it's mostly women. And obviously, the social conditioning and messages that we get in our society, if you're a man or if you're a woman, if you're a boy or if you're a girl, are pretty different. And the sort of man up message really is that asking for help, talking about your feelings, reaching out to other people, it's kind of a sign of weakness. And in fact, it's maybe even something you should be ashamed of. And so part of what we've got going on here is that even though we know social support helps with stress across the board for everybody, it's a resource that women access and girls access much more than guys. And so one of the things, both in terms of ourselves, if you're a man like me or Houston, the men in your family, the boys in your family, and your students, is that we really need to start working on spreading the message and finding ways to encourage men and boys to reach out, connect, share what they're going through, because we know it works. And it's not something that should just be something that women, get to benefit from. Now, if we dig into it a little bit more, there's some research on social support and stress that gets into some sort of surprising stuff, and it has a lot to do with the differences between boys and girls. And one of the things that really drove this research was, if you look at kids and you look at levels of anxiety and depression, boys and girls are basically about the same as they go through elementary and middle school. And then when they kind of move into high school, all of a sudden girls' level of anxiety and stress take off. And, by sophomore year, girls in general have a lot higher levels of anxiety and depression than boys. And so some researchers were trying to dig into this and try and figure out why this is. And they came up with some ideas. And one of the things that they were actually able to show in their research is that there's something called co-rumination that's problematic. And if you think about it, if you think about what anxiety and depression are, what they have in common at the individual level is rumination. Rumination is basically you just get stuck in a thought loop. So if it's depression, you're just stuck thinking about, I suck, my life sucks, everything sucks, the future is going to suck, the things that I've done in the past are terrible. If it's anxiety, it's a lot of rumination about what could go wrong. It's a lot of rumination, worrying about things in your life. But the common ingredient is rumination. Turns out rumination is not just something that people are able to do by themselves. It's something that we can do together. And basically, this is the three ingredients that characterize co-rumination. It's excessively discussing and rehashing problems, encouraging each other to talk about problems, and then in particular, dwelling on negative thoughts and feelings. And if we think about social support, and we think about this kind of formula here, what we find is that it's actually kind of problematic, in particular for teenage girls. And they were able to show in their research that co-rumination is one of the things that drives that higher rate of anxiety and depression for girls compared to boys in high school. So girls have more close relationships, more close friendships. Their social networks are more involved than that of boys. The more that they have to begin with, anxiety or depression, the more that they're going to get involved in co-rumination, turning to their friends to talk about their problems. There's a really paradoxical thing about that, because on the one hand, it actually does increase how good they feel about their friendships. It actually helps them bond with their friends. But the other thing about it is that co-rumination with their friends actually increases anxiety and depression for girls, teenage girls. And there's a feedback loop here where you're feeling anxious, which we know at this point is epidemic in high school kids in general, girls in particular. You're feeling anxious, you're feeling, sad, depressed. You turn to a friend, you talk about it in the ways that we were just talking about, excessively just stuck on the problem and, encouraging each other, and then really dwelling on how awful you feel. And then what you find is that those girls become more anxious and depressed. The more anxious and depressed you are, the more conflicts and problems you have with other people. And then the more co-rumination, and it kind of circles around that way. So what's it like for boys and men? Well, part of the deal, again, is that boys and men have fewer, closer relationships. Their social worlds just aren't as intertwined with other people at that level. And at the same time, when they have anxiety and depression, they also engage in more co-rumination. And again, it also increases their positive friendships and the strength of their bonds. The thing that's really mysterious is that for boys and men, co-rumination does not increase anxiety and depression. Why? I don't know. They haven't figured it out yet. So we have this paradox where this thing that happens with regards to anxiety and depression and stress affects boys versus girls differently. So with girls, what they found was actually, and I say this is probably true, the research I've seen is primarily teenage girls. I think it's true with women too, is that it turns out that like really connecting with your girlfriends, talking about your problems, even sort of like, encouraging each other to share what's going on and what the difficulties are and stuff, it actually improves friendships. The part about co-rumination that is the problematic part that increases anxiety and depression is the dwelling on negative thoughts and feelings. So if you're engaging in talking to somebody that you're close to, trying to be supportive, and you find yourself just like really focusing and stuck on negative thoughts and feelings, that's where you're actually potentially making things worse. This is a little thing I found in a newspaper not long ago. Health experts are warning that a culture of toxic positivity, the American urge to put a happy spin on bad situations, may exacerbate the anxiety, depression, and fear that millions of people are actually experiencing in the pandemic. Insisting that everything will be fine or look on the bright side could make it harder for you and those around you to deal with stress in a healthy way. So again, this avoiding stress is really problematic. But now we've also got this thing about how if you're not careful, talking about it can make it worse. So what do we do? Well, obviously, what I'm saying is if you're female, you should engage with your networks. You should talk to your girlfriends or, guy friends about what's going on, about the struggles that you're having. You should reach out to people and be supportive. But I think it's important to ask yourself, if you're the one who's kind of struggling, after the conversation, did it make you feel better or did it leave you feeling worse? Like we have to figure out how to identify when social support is actually supportive. So I think some of the basic elements are what are helpful is that, first of all, it really helps to reach out, like amongst the people that how are things going? Don't be, I like the phrase go first, be the one to reach out. And then you have to listen with empathy and perspective taking, which I'm going to talk a little more about, and avoid the pit of emotional despair. If you find a conversation circling down the drain of we're just stuck talking about how awful it is, and afterwards, if I reflect, I'm like, yeah, actually, I kind of feel worse, not better, then you're probably stuck in the co-rumination trap. What you want to do if you're the one being supportive, is, really listen, really try to understand. I mean, there's this classic idea that like men just want to solve problems, and so they don't listen to, the feelings, and that, everyone in general wants to be understood. They want to know that someone really gets what they're experiencing. But then ultimately you want to move the conversation either towards problem solving, what can they do about the problem, connecting it to meaning in terms of, like, how do we make sense out of this in a way that helps us feel a little stronger? Or, realistically, if there's no way to fix the problem and you can't sort of make sense out of it in a helpful way, like distraction at some point is much better than just staying stuck in the co-rumination loop. Okay, Houston.
Coming in here to take over for a second to role model one of our community building activities. We have lots of different ones that we use, and we build these for our content, for our advisory curriculum. We have versions of this at the elementary level that are designed to use with students. But what we've discovered is that these are really effective ways to build support even among staff. So one of the ones we want to play with and show off today, and to make sure that we're walking the walk, an acknowledgement that we did this the other, Brian, I think it was last week, we had our like after hours social, and we used these tools to facilitate connection and meeting, because sometimes you need a framework as opposed to just the open-ended, let's talk about something. So there's everything from,
let me just say, one of the things that we've heard from some teenagers is that it can be hard in, an advisory class or something with students you might not know that well, to jump into a lot of personally revealing stuff. And so this is just a fun way to connect.
Absolutely. And likewise with staff, right? There's staff that are new to staff that don't feel as comfortable in the virtual setting. So using tools. One of my favorites, of course, is GIF feelings, where students can select a box. It opens up an image and they get to reflect on when the last time they felt this feeling was. Here's one of my personal favorites. Another favorite. Maybe we've all been feeling this a little bit today. As educators, perhaps you know this one. And the cool part about the menu is that you get to go back to the beginning, to choose your way back into this menu here, which allows us to jump to the one I want to role model with us today. Call this the word unscrambler. And these are brand new for the second half of the year as we build out new advisory lessons. This one we wanted to do today because it is a webinar format, so we get to use the chat. The way it works, you choose either A, B, C, or D. And then you'll see a series of letters on the screen, and your goal is to see how many possible words can be made using just those letters. So in the chat, A, B, C, or D, we'll go with the first one that I see. B, Valerie says B, let's go to B. Here we go. In the chat, write as many words as you can using just the words, the letters on the screen. Nice, coming in hot. Jennifer with we, going really small. We have everything from below, elbow. Ooh, well done, seeing those things right away. What else we got? Low, bow, bowl, low, B, bellow, B-E-L-O. I don't know if that's a proper word, but I like it. Lobe, that's a good one, Jennifer, a unique one. Below, low, bowl, low, elbow. Lob, really nice, Chris. That's a unique one coming in here. Jacqueline with lobe. Not everyone sees that one. Web, wobble. I like it, Valerie. Owl, says Marissa. Owl, says Kimberly. Nearly at the same time. Oh, owl twins, well done. Beatrice says bow. Kathleen says ow. Owie. Well done. Let's bring up the full list, see if we missed any. Some of the things that I didn't see. Whoa, oh, that's a tough one. I don't know if I saw web in there. Blue, I know I saw blow. Bowel, that's a tough one, but a necessary one. Angie's here. Hello, Angie, bringing down the list. She brought whoa in there, nicely done. So you can see that a simple activity like this, while maybe not necessarily a get to know you, is a practical way to increase engagement in a low level. So as Brian said, you can build towards those higher level ones, which many of these activities are designed to do. Things like gift feelings or deck of destiny helps us tap into meaningful questions that allow us to learn more about each other. You can go ahead and take over the screen share, Brian. Just wanted to give a couple practical ideas on what it looks like to build support, not only with students, but also among our staff.
Says you have to stop sharing first.
All right. I'll let it go then. I'll relinquish power.
All right. Where are we here? Oh, how did I jump forward? Okay. So I want to point out that we often think, again, of resilience as an individual quality. I'm resilient, that person's less resilient. And I like this Chris Blodgett quote. He's one of the top experts on trauma-informed practice. And he basically says resilience is about the assets, the personal, familial, community, and cultural assets that any person has that supports them and allows them to grow despite challenges. So that's really what we're talking about here, is building resilience for ourselves and each other through connections. So again, you want to check out how people are doing. You want to ask, be the one to kind of reach out and see how it's going. And then active listening is a super important skill that we can all work on. And when I was in social work school, they taught us this thing about minimal prompts, which is basically little things to kind of keep it going. But then it's this rephrasing, paraphrasing, wow, so, and then you kind of try and see if you got what they're saying so that they can tell you if they're really feeling heard or not. I want to talk a little bit about empathy and perspective taking. Of the two, I like perspective taking because empathy to me kind of connotes there's the affective empathy of like, I feel what you're feeling, but it's hard to do that on purpose. Perspective taking, we can make the effort to try to understand what other people are going through. And it's really not just emotions. Part of that is that it has a lot to do with people's history, the context that they're in, what it means for any given little thing to go wrong. Let's say you're teaching a lesson over, Zoom and something in the lesson goes wrong. It's probably going to be something that you experience differently if you also have two elementary school kids in the next room who are fighting and you should be helping, but you're there trying to do the Zoom and it's breaking down, as opposed to somebody who actually doesn't have a whole lot else going on. Context really matters. And it takes some time to figure out not just kind of what is going on for a person, like what's the things that are happening, the stressors, but trying to understand their perspective. And I would say that what we often do is say, well, how would I feel about that? Like if that happened to me, what would that be like? And then assume that that's right, when the reality is oftentimes it's not. And so what we really need to do is, if we want to be a supportive listener, try to understand, ask questions, paraphrase back. But then if we think we have a good idea how they're feeling, the main thing is to take a guess and ask them, because it may be that you think, wow, you sound really angry. And they might say, actually, no, I think it might be more disappointed. We don't know for sure until we ask. And that's one of the key things about perspective taking, is that we have to sort of include them in the process, not just assume that we know. So we are going to walk through a quick summary and then take some questions. So first of all, again, the key thing about stress is you got to take it on. I didn't talk about this, but there's a lot of research that shows that there's two responses to stress. One is the threat response, and the other is the challenge response. And the psychophysiological profile are completely opposite. If you have the threat response, basically psychologically and physiologically, you're preparing for injury. If you have the challenge response, you like physically, psychologically, you're bringing your resources to bear. And what makes the difference between which response you have? A lot of it has to do with whether you think you can handle it. And a lot of that has to do with just taking stock when you're in a stressful situation. Hey, wait, what have I been through before this? How did I handle that? What are some of the resources I have so that I don't have to lose myself in drinking and overeating and just binge watching TV and kind of the negative behaviors that feel good in the moment because I'm just avoiding it, but the reality is they're going to make it worse. And I think one of the main ways that we want to think about what are our resources is what are our social resources? And what are we doing despite the pandemic to build up our bank of social resources so that we have more ability to kind of take on stressors that are so unavoidable and, really try and handle them in ways that allow us to keep going and even thriving. Now, it's always good to keep in mind when thinking about psychology research is it is weird science. It's really based on this subset of humans, and so it doesn't always map across different cultures. It doesn't always map even across sexes. Men and women obviously aren't the same. So it's always good to kind of dig into it a little bit. And what we find again in the stress research is that there's a lot of emphasis on fight or flight, not as much about freeze, but these are the basic physiological responses that people have on the individualistic level. What we actually know is that what doesn't get nearly enough emphasis is this sort of social response to stress, reaching out to other people for support, reaching out to other people to provide support and connecting, because that's actually what makes us stronger. That's what builds up our resilience, and that's what helps us get through. And I think part of what's difficult about these times is that, of course, again, social isolation is in and of itself kind of toxic. So I know that I went over to a friend's house last night, and we sat out on his porch with a lot of clothes on because it's kind of cold here and it was a little bit rainy, but he kind of had a thing put up. And we talked about the election, and we kind of were there supporting each other through the ups and downs of what was going on, and that was super important to me. And I was lucky that I was able to find someone and make the effort. I think that it's not just, of course, true for us, but it's also very true for teenagers, especially teenage girls, but also teenage boys. And it's two different versions, right? So with girls, they have a lot of close relationships, as we know, and there's a tendency to get stuck in co-rumination. Hang on a second, my battery's dying. Sorry about that. There's a tendency to get stuck for the girls in co-rumination and problem talk and kind of magnifying the negative feelings so that they end up sometimes feeling worse. What's the flip side problem for boys? They don't turn to anybody for support. So boys, girls, men, women, I think that we basically know that the prescription is the same: healthy social support. But what oftentimes it means for teenage girls in particular, I'm going to say women as well, is engaging in that support in ways that's supportive, not going to get you kind of caught up in magnifying the difficult feelings. Whereas for boys and for men, it's really about finding ways to encourage them to open up and connect in those ways that they can get the social support that we all know that we need. So Houston has another little exercise for us, because I tried to sprinkle in these things that you can use to connect with kids, and I think this one's one that we're going to kind of twist to tap off the end of this, and then we'll go into questions.
Yeah, Brian, if you just go one more slide ahead, it's
there we go.
You mentioned earlier the affective side of empathy, which I think some people forget. You can combine the affective side of empathy with perspective taking by tapping into what people are feeling, which is that emotional side of things, and beginning to try on that perspective. Hey, it's interesting that in my class, I'm feeling hopeful today where someone else is feeling overwhelmed. And can we try on other people's perspectives? This is a menu of those emotional words to help broaden our emotional vocabulary, which increases our ability not only to identify those feelings in ourselves, but also to be able to better see them experienced in others. We do this oftentimes with students. We offer it as a resource with students, but I thought it'd be a cool way to end today. In the chat, go ahead and use this list of words to write down, what do you feel coming out of today? At the end of today, Jamila says content. We got joyful, optimistic, inspired, hopeful. These are good. We got worried, which I feel, yeah, I don't know if that's a political sense. Jennifer, hopeful. all kinds of glad, hopeful. Bobby's got a blah. I don't even know if that's on the list, but that's okay. Hopeful and inspired, optimistic, amazing. I know this is probably contextualized across your whole day, but I hope that the webinar today at least brought the emotional mood meter up a few points, if nothing else. Here's what I want to do. Brian, I want to drop into the chat a question that came in a little bit earlier. The question is there another opposite end to rumination? So rumination is more steeped in the negative, something to the other end that is on the positive. So what's like the positive version of rumination? And I'm going to give you a second to think about that. And while you're thinking about that, Brian, I want to show off a couple of resources. So I'm going to go ahead and steal the screen one last time while you're noodling on that, Brian, and share you into my world for just a second. Nice. I'm going to drop into the chat before we sign off here, and before Brian answers that question we had come in, a couple of links for you. The first one that you see in that chat is a link to our virtual school culture training. So I run these alongside my co-founder, John, or occasionally our director of professional development, Chelsea. They're full day experiences, virtual, they're super meaningful, a practical way to tackle school culture, even in a virtual setting. How do you do a systematic approach to making sure that classrooms and campuses have a school culture where everyone feels like they have a sense of safety, belonging, and connectedness? The second link that you'll see there is a brand new, we just released it yesterday, one that I'm super excited about. We're having our first principals conference. And in fact, if you head on over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/characterstrong, we're having a competition right now where we're giving away a couple of spots. This conference is spread over 2 days, but it's a practical experience for leadership in a building that deals with frameworks and tools. It's going to be an awesome couple of days. Last but certainly not least, two things I'm super proud of that we put together as an organization are some resources for the election, even coming out on the far side of the election as we are. These are totally free for you to use in your school. And as you navigate through them, we have our 10 traits that we use in our elementary content. And for each one, we have questions related to how that trait relates to being a leader right now. The secondary level, we have a protocol for students to write and reflect, and we take each of these quotes, each of these traits, and try to apply them to the political election landscape. So that's a free resource for you because we believe in supporting schools in that way presently. Jamila asks, can you attend that principal conference if you're an aspiring principal? Yes, please, absolutely. Jamila, I think you will totally dig it. So those are the resources I dropped in the chat. I'll go ahead and tune myself out. Brian, if you want to answer the question around positive rumination, what does that look like?
So I just Googled rumination here, and basically, if you look at the dictionary if you look at the any kind of psychology site, it's really linked to negative rumination. So like Psychology Today says, it's the process of continuously thinking about the same thoughts. It's simply repetitively going over a thought or problem without completion. But if you look at the dictionary definition, number one is a deep or considered thought about something. And number two cracks me up because it's the action of chewing the cud. It's what a cow does. And so, yeah, of course, what we're talking about is really getting caught up in really thinking about a negative experience, sharing it in a way that's too much focused on the negative emotions involved. But
Brian,
yeah, of course you could. Yeah.
Could you share us back into the Google Slides just for a second? We'll turn those captions back on.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. We're still getting used to that piece.
Are the captions on now? Is it popping up? I'm not seeing it.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I think if you think about what I said about the challenge response to stress, basically that actually is kind of aided in to some extent by a certain kind of rumination, which is like thinking about stressful stuff you've been through in the past and how did you handle it? What were the strengths that you brought? What were the resources you brought? Who are the people that you can kind of connect with that maybe you've actually kind of let slip away? I mean, so I live in Seattle. One of my best buddies for many, many, many years lives in Oakland. And, we would get in touch every couple months. And honestly, when the whole shutdown happened, I found that he and I and another friend of ours ended up in this chat kind of chain that every other day at least, we're just chatting away. I reached out to people who I hadn't had much contact with for a while, just because I just needed that social contact. So yes, you can ruminate about positive things, just like negative things.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brian. As always, for the practical walkthrough with the research to back it up, and hopefully a couple of tools for you all to take back and use in your work. Again, you will get a replay from today. We'll send along some of the slides. And if you want to dig in further to that advisory content I shared, I did share a link to download some of those samples. And I'll do that again one more time here before we sign off. We always have these webinars coming up with all kinds of fun, practical, relevant things. Thank you for joining us today, making time, and we hope to see you on the next Character Strong webinar. Make it a great day.
Thanks, everyone.